The next section on our theme is the About Us section. All the elements pertaining to this section are contained inside section tags and also a separate container. Inside the container, we have a row and a column that contain the About heading. Next, we have another row, and this row contains 2 blocks of code, or 3 blocks of code. The first block of code is this paragraph here, and that's contained inside a column that spans 4 cells in the Bootstrap grid layout. The second block of code contains this text, and the column is the same size as the first. The third column, which spans 8 of the cells in the Bootstrap grid layout, contains this one button. And we can see that the text center class has also been applied. And so it centers the button inside a fairly large column. Underneath the About section, we have the Contact section. Okay, so inside this section, we have a container. And inside the container, we have a row that contains the Contact Me heading. The second row contains all the form elements. We won't go through all these different form elements because we've already been through that quite a bit in previous lessons. So there's really nothing new there. It's just each item contained inside, of course, the form, the open and close form tag. And each form element is contained within its own div. And so on. Underneath the Contact section, we have the footer. The footer is actually one of the last components of the page, and it's contained within an open and close footer tag. All the elements of the footer are contained within a separate container and also within a separate row. And then inside this row, we have 4 columns, or 3 columns rather. The first column contains the location, the second column contains the social media icons, and the third column contains just this snippet of text. And they're all designed to collapse one under the other when the browser shrinks to a certain size. So you can see that each column is next to one another when the browser is expanded, but when it's contracted, they fall one below the other. Underneath the footer, we have another footer with the class footer below. And that contains the copyright text that you see here. Now this code block is for this up arrow button. So when I click the up arrow, it takes us right back to the top of the page. And so that's what this div is for. It contains that button. And you can see that the link on this button is set to page top. So we have a named anchor there, and that's why it knows where to go. Below that, we have the modals. So if you recall, anytime one of the images in the portfolio is clicked, it opens a modal with more information. So all the modal code blocks can be found here, and there's going to be 6 of them because there's 6 individual images, and each image opens its own separate modal with different content. It's a common practice to have the modals at the bottom of the page because the code blocks can get fairly lengthy, especially if you have a lot of content in these modals. So you can see that each modal has a modal fade class attached to it, and that's what gives it the fade effect when it loads. It also has an ID attribute set to portfolio modal 1. And if you remember, the link attribute on this first image was set to portfolio modal 1. And that's how the modal system works. That's how it knows to open this specific modal when this image is clicked. And we covered that earlier as well. Okay, so it's just a standard modal. And inside the modal, we have the modal content. And the content includes the close button here, so that dismisses the modal when it's clicked. It also has a separate container and a row which holds all the text and images that we see inside the modal. So again, we won't go through each modal because we've worked with modals before, and it's the same concept. It's just copying and pasting blocks of code for whichever components you want to include in the theme. Say, for example, I didn't want 6 modals. Well, I could just delete this entire code block, and that would remove the modal. That would remove portfolio modal 2. So it's very easy to work with these themes. You can just delete and add depending on what your needs are. It's more or less just a matter of copying and pasting. And so we'll scroll all the way down. At the bottom of the page, we have some script files that are used. And these are used for various functions on the page. So for example, we have the jQuery library. We have the bootstrap.min.js file, that's essential. We have some plugins that are used for different animations. For example, the easing when the navigation expands and contracts. And also we have JavaScript files for the page, for the form validation. So this form does come with JavaScript validation. So if I don't input any information and click send, you'll notice that I do get the error messages. And that's what these validation JavaScript files are for. And then we have the custom JavaScript for this particular theme. Okay, so when you do download these themes, it's very important that you understand that a lot of these files are created and used inside the HTML file here. And these are all key components of this layout. Okay, and so that covers the entire theme. There's many different types of themes, but the concepts are all the same. Once you download the theme, you can add to it, remove from it, customize it, and it makes it a lot easier than coding a Bootstrap page from scratch. You can see it's a fairly lengthy file, and it would take quite a bit of time. So hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next lesson.